I'm delighted now on the subject of the monster that is Axel Rudakubana and many other things to be joined by no less than Ann Widdecombe, who needs no introduction really, former Home Office Minister, very, very prominent. Ann, thank you very much indeed for joining me.
Good morning, yes.
Yes, good morning. Look, Ann, can we talk about the death penalty? I suspect you have strong views. Look, I've had my mind changed, but I'm going to be devil's advocate for a second, if I may, just for a semblance of balance. The death penalty is barbaric, particularly in a civilised society, and it's not a deterrent.
Yeah, I've heard your previous discussion on deterrent. The trouble is you're all discussing it in a vacuum. Let's look at what the actual figures are. The death penalty, as Paul from Burnley said, was abolished in 1965. Until then, murder fell, and this is important to understand, into two different categories. Those murders that would have attracted the death penalty and those murders that would not have done. And we called the first the capital murder rate because you were subject to capital punishment. Now, for 5 years after the death penalty was abolished in 1965, we continued to collect statistics precisely in order to assess whether it was a... We continued to collect statistics on that same basis. Murder that would have been capital, murder that wouldn't. And in that period, the capital murder rate went up 125%. The incidence of criminals taking firearms on robberies went up something like, I think it was 40%. There was a huge rise that proved conclusively that it had been a deterrent. Now, you might still oppose it on other grounds, but it was a deterrent. And your analogy with America, if I may say so, doesn't stand up, because in this country, if you were found guilty, you had a right of appeal, obviously, the Home Secretary had the final say. It was all very quick, and you would be doing the 8 o'clock within, a few months, sometimes even less than that. On death row, you can be there for decades. There's no deterrent. There's no, I did this and I'm going to pay that tomorrow morning. You can be there
because of the appeals process, presumably, which is so elongated.
Yeah. I mean, it's a ridiculous system in America, quite honestly, ridiculous. But no, it is a deterrent. And, you can argue on all sorts of moral grounds, but not on deterrent. So,
but I accept that it would deter, particularly, let's call them professionalised crimes. But what about psychopaths? Yeah, what about psychopaths, and what about terrorism? I mean, I can't see an ideologically obsessed terrorist, an Islamic extremist, or shall we for balance say far-right extremist that might actually commit a terrorist atrocity. I can't see them being deterred by the death penalty, so it wouldn't fix that problem.
No, I would never claim that it would. There have always been people throughout history when there are far more ghastly punishments than merely being hanged, hanged, drawn and quartered. It didn't deter people with certain conditions or who were ideologically driven. They would face burning at the stake if they had to.
Yeah.
So, of course, you're right on that score. But overall, it's a huge deterrent. Do you think of the number of lives that would be saved if we had it?
Yeah. And balanced against the fact that sometimes there are miscarriages of justice, Anne?
Yes. Well, again, I think that the big difference between now and, say, the 1950s is that we have DNA.
Yeah.
And in many, many cases, there is no doubt whatever that somebody has done it. If you remember, well, you probably won't remember, but there was a huge campaign on behalf of somebody called Hanratty, who was supposed to have been hanged unjustly. And DNA came along quite a while afterwards, but was used to test the case, and lo and behold, he was guilty. So, I mean, and in this case, and this is different because he was a juvenile at the time, but in this case, there is no doubt at all, that he did it. I mean, he's never denied it.
And what we've heard on this station over the last 24 hours since the sentencing, obviously since this came to the fore so prominently yesterday as a consequence of the sentencing of Axel Rudakubana by his Justice Judge Goose, it seems to be that there's an outpouring, of course, of anger, grief, and, frankly, amazement at the hideous nature, the evil nature of these crimes. But when it comes to the death penalty, there's definitely an underlying current of a motive of revenge and vengeance. Do you think there's place for that in terms of that justifying the death penalty, that it can simply be human nature saying, we want rid of this individual, he should be wiped from the face of the earth because of his crime? So nothing to do with deterrent, not even justice really, but just an eye for an eye. Do you think that's justified?
No. I mean, I think the feeling of outrage is justified. I think the immediate feeling, oh, we want vengeance on this man, that is perfectly understandable. But it's not the role of the law. It really is not the role of the law. That is why we have law. It's so that we don't have justice delivered by lynch mobs. We don't even have justice delivered by victims. We have to have justice delivered by a completely impartial process. That's why we have the law. And I, as a Christian, am not going to say that I want to kill somebody purely out of vengeance. I look at the bigger picture. As I say, this case, it wouldn't apply anyway because he was a juvenile. But there's a bigger picture, and that picture is that if it's really a deterrent, then it saves lives.
Yes.
And so you have to make a moral choice. Do you save the life of the criminal, or do you save the life of the potential victims? That's the choice.
Reform MPs Rupert, Lowe and Lee Anderson have said in the last few hours that they want to see, and I think this is a quote from them, they want to see Axel Rudakubana hang. Do we expect to see some kind of move in Parliament now, do you think, for a motion to reinstate the death penalty? Do you think that will happen? Can that happen? Can that be brought to the chamber?
It can happen in as much as we're now free of European law, which would have prevented us doing it. It can, but it wouldn't get a majority. I mean, the one thing I think you can point to is that every time the death penalty has been debated in Parliament, and the Conservatives used to allow it once every Parliament, every time that has happened, the majority against it has grown bigger.
But do you think that parliamentarians are out of step with the country? Because I suspect they are in that regard.
Well, nevertheless, that is our process for making law.
Yeah. No, true. But one of my callers earlier on said, now is not the time to be discussing and debating such things. Of course, we know that when on a weekly basis there is a gun atrocity in the United States, the politicians, particularly on the Republican side, say, look, now is not the time in the immediate aftermath of such an incident to discuss this on a knee-jerk basis. But I would suggest, actually, that this is exactly the time in Parliament to be discussing this, isn't it?
No. I mean, I take the line that this is something that needs careful thought. It needs to be argued rationally and coolly, and that is what has to happen now. Everybody at the moment is focused on the fact he's got 52 years in jail. He's going to be an old man by the time he comes out, if he comes out ever.
Yeah. And
that is the punishment that he has. And it seems to me, in the circumstances, bearing in mind that he's 17, it's adequate.
Yeah. And so with
sorry,
Anne. Yeah, you're suffering a little bit there. Sorry, and we won't keep you that much longer. But do you think that the rules need to change then in terms of sentencing guidelines, whereby if someone is able to commit an adult crime, as Axel Rudakubana did, that they should be sentenced as an adult? I mean, forget the fact that he was only 8 days away from his 18th birthday, but the fact that the judge showed much frustration yesterday, actually, Justice Goose, with regard to lamenting the fact that, of course, if Rudakubana had been 18, he would have given him a whole life tariff. Do you think it's now appropriate for those sentencing guidelines to be relooked at?
I think you could look at what I call senior juveniles, sort of 16, 17-year-olds, who should have developed enough empathy and moral understanding. I think you might well look at that and say, could it be appropriate in extreme circumstances?
Yeah, I mean, we wouldn't want to be hanging 10-year-olds, Anne, would we? Like the Bolger killers.
I hope not. I really hope, Mary Bell, I hope not. No. But what I'm saying, what I've just tried to say is that if you look at older juveniles, if you look at 16 and 17-year-olds, there might just be an argument for allowing a whole life tariff. But in effect, this is what this is. I mean, you add 52 and 18 together, and you've got an old age pensioner staggering out of prison.
Well, he's 70, but a liberal parole board, as I called them, and we have had many instances, many causes to criticise the parole board in recent years, the likes of Gary Glitter and others. We're not particularly confident, are we, as a society, albeit that this is going to be 52 years away, of a parole board insisting that he stays in, despite the comments by Judge Goose. I mean, he could still be out walking the streets at 70 years old.
The fact is, you're talking half a century ahead, and we don't even know what our systems will be then.
Or if we have a system.
Oh, we'll have a system, but we don't know what it will be.
It depends how the Labour government leave the country in 4 years' time, Anne, doesn't it?
Well, I could describe to you how they'll leave the country in 4 years' time, but I'm talking a half a century ahead, and we really don't know, and we should speculate on that.
So you think it was an adequate sentence and Judge Goose did the right thing as much as he was able?
He did the only thing he could do, and I think it was an adequate sentence.
Yeah, good. Ann Widdecombe, as ever, thank you very, very much indeed for your wise words and clarification.